What is up, guys? TopTierYugioh here, and today I've got a Numeron Synchro Eldlich deck profile. And so on this channel, we've covered Synchro Eldlich in depth. We've done Numeron Eldlich even more in depth. But today we're going to be combining both of those engines to make what I believe is the best Eldlich deck of the current format. And again, that is Numeron Synchro Eldlich. And I'm going to explain to you exactly why I believe in this deck, why it is, why it works, and what we can do to further optimize this deck, because while the list that I'm sharing is good, there are some changes that you could maybe make to fit into your own personal preferences or to address your local metagame even better. But before getting started, if you're a non-believer and you think that either the Numeron build or the Synchro build is better, let me know in the comment section, but also check out the deck profiles that I did for both of those, because they are both solid decks as well. But let's go ahead and get into this profile. So we're going to be starting with the Numeron package. We have the 3 copies of Numeron Network, 3 copies of Numeron Wall to Search Network, 1 Terraforming the Search Network, and then also the 1 copy of Numeron Calling. So then moving on, we have 2 copies of Lord, obviously, and for the Synchro package, we have 3 copies of Jet Synchron, 3 copies of Tuning, and then 2 copies of Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion. I think this is the best version of the Synchro combo to play, rather than playing the version with a Despot, because I think the Despot version requires you, or really, I shouldn't say requires, but it necessitates, but that means the same thing. But when you play the Despot version, it kind of forces you to play like Formula Synchron and other cards that you can use to take advantage of the Despot. But in this variant of the deck and in this version of the combo, we don't have to play those, and we also don't have the space for that anyways. And on top of that, it allows us to play through hand traps a little easier as well, because we're able to make Herald before getting to Auroradon, which means the opponent just can't negate the Auroradon, or they can't Nibiru us after the Auroradon, versus when you're playing the Despot version, they can Nibiru you after Auroradon when you bring back your Despot, and you just lose. And so we really don't have to worry about that. It lets us play through Nibiru. Not that it really hurts us as much anyways because of the Numerons, but if we do start off with Synchro plays, it's nice to be able to play through that and play through other hand traps. And so really, this deck is very hand trap resistant with, the Numerons not really being affected by anything outside of Ogre, and then with the O-Lions allowing us to play through stuff like Nibiru as well. So we're definitely very well positioned against that. But the other thing that I really like about this deck, and what I think its core strength is its consistency. And so if you look at most Eldlich decks, both the other variants that I think are very popular, the Numeron and the Synchro build, the Numeron build only has 7 starter cards. Your 3 copies of Network, your Walls, and your Terraforming. So only 7. The Synchro build only has 6 though. Your 3 Jets and your 3 Tunings to search a Jet. But in this build, we're able to combine them and play 13 starter cards. And so we're vastly more consistent than those other versions of the deck because we have more starter cards. And a big problem that those other decks have is that when they don't have their starter cards, they end up having to play like a pure Eldlich deck pretty much. And a pure Eldlich engine, I mean, it's good, but it doesn't do enough. And especially not in the early game to where you're having to like use Lord to destroy your own things to get it into the graveyard, or to get your golden land traps to the grave. Like, it's so hard to get the engine going because the engine doesn't have any own starters. And so that's why we need to combine these engines with the Eldlich decks to make them able to do anything. But in this build, you really don't have that problem because you have so many starters anyways. But now, on top of being more consistent, this deck is also more versatile as well, because think about this. Like, let's say you're starting off with a Numeron Network, but your opponent has a Ghost Ogre. Well, now you could just normal summon Jet Synchron and still end on Savage Dragon plus Herald. Or let's say your opponent has a Nibiru in hand, Nibiru and Ash. Well, too bad for them. You open Numeron Network, so you make S0, and then you skip their whole turn. And so it's like this deck is so resistant to hand traps, and if you really only try to play for or against one engine, you really get punished by the other. So like if you end up playing Xyz Encore in your side deck, you just get wrecked by Borload's Savage Dragon plus Herald. But at the same time, if you're playing Nibiru, you get wrecked by S0. And so this deck becomes so much more versatile, especially in the early game. But even in the mid to late game, this deck is also more versatile because you still have like access code and stuff to OTK your opponent with the Synchro engine. But at the same time, if you draw into your Network mid to late game, you could also just like use Network to summon a bunch of gates and attack into your opponent's board and maybe OTK them, or maybe you make a Mega Clops and break their board like that. You have so many different options with this variant of the deck that each of the individual versions of the deck just don't have. And so it's more consistent, it's more versatile, and just generally more dynamic while still maintaining that same level of power that you get from your Eldlich engine. Like, you still have access to Lord, you still have Cursed, the Golden Land traps. All of these cards are still very strong that are in your deck, and you're able to fully optimize as well. And so this is easily the best version in my opinion. But let's go ahead and get through the rest of the cards. Then we'll talk more about the deck later. It's not perfect, there are downsides, but again, we'll get into that a little later. Maybe do some test hands if there's time as well. But for the rest of the Eldlich engine, we have 3 copies of Cursed, 1 copy of Black Awakening. I've been going back and forth between this and White Destiny, and I'm kind of up in the air on it. The fact that we only play 2 Golden Lords makes me think Black Awakening, because it's going to help us get it out of the deck, but at the same time, White Destiny being a quick play is quite nice. And so I do like that. 3 copies of Scarlet, 3 Conquistador, 3 Wakero. That's it for the Golden Land engine. For the hand traps, we play 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, 3 copies of Gamma, 1 Driver, 1 Ash, and 1 Veiler. So this is a interesting hand trap lineup, especially the 1 Ash and 1 Veiler. And I'll start with those because these were the last 2 cards I actually added to the deck. And the reason for that is because I wanted these to continue giving me the utility that you get out of the other parts of this deck that you're playing anyways. And so I wanted to be able to summon a tuner off of my Scarlets. I wanted to be able to summon a spellcaster off of my Needle Fibers. And so being able to do that gives me easier access to things like Selene and Access Code Talker, which can end the game for you, as well as just help you go into various different combos, like just summoning an Ash sometimes, or Scarlet into Ash late game. Being able to just summon a Savage Dragon can be very, very powerful, and sometimes just win you the game. And so I still wanted to just have these in my deck, but also they're still hand traps. And sure, they're not the best right now, but they are still very good. I do think that they're relatively weak against the best and more common decks of the format. Like, they're very weak against Numeron Eldlich. They're very weak against Adamanticators, very weak against dragons. And so I really think that they're not like mandatory 3-ofs anymore, especially not in this deck where space is so tight. But at the same time, they are not bad to have, and they do serve a purpose in this deck in particular. And now as for the rest of the hand traps, I think that triple Imperm and triple Gamma is almost, these are mandatory right now. These are the best hand traps in the game. Both of these allow you to deal with S0 for one, and Numeron Eldlich is becoming very popular. You need to have an out to S0 because nothing else in your deck will allow you to do much against it versus just your Eldlich engine. But you don't want to be playing pure Eldlich against Eldlich that also has S0. Like, you lose. And so you really want to be able to negate that S0 if possible. And these are going to be the cards that allow you to do that. But also, when playing against those other combo decks that I mentioned earlier, like Adamanticators and Dragons, these are the better hand traps because you can negate stuff even though they have Guardian on board with Imperm. And then this is also going to be removing monsters from their board, so it makes it harder for them to use them as link material and whatnot with Gamma. And so these are better against Adamanticators for sure. And the same things would apply against Dragon Link as well. I mean, those decks are very similar, and these are just the best against them. Not to mention that the Gamma can also be used to protect your own plays. For example, Ogre against Network is a big thing right now. People are starting to play Ogre in the main deck. You're going to be happy that you have these Gammas to negate those. And so I definitely am a big fan of Gamma and Imperm right now. But that's pretty much it for the hand traps as well as for the main deck. Let's go ahead and go into the... We'll go with the extra. And so for the extra deck, we have 1 copy of S0, 1 copy of Gate 1, Gate 2, and Gate 3. This is just the smallest package we can play for our Numeron engine. Just 3 monsters that we can summon to go into S0. That's about it. As you can see, there is the 4th here, but I'll talk about that a little later. These are just the basics that you definitely need. Then for the Link monsters, we have 1 copy of Linkaribo, 1 copy of Linkross, 2 copies of Needle Fiber, and I actually like this a little bit more than playing the 1 Needle Fiber and 1 Barricade Blocker, which you would need for the combo. Instead, you can just use a second Needle Fiber instead, and while you lose the ability to use Barricade Blocker's effect to get stuff back like Cursed Outland, but I think this is just a little bit more versatile in that if your first needle gets stopped, you still can summon a second Needle Fiber and use the effect. Whereas if we were trying to play just 1 Barricade Blocker and 1 Needle, we wouldn't be able to do that. It's like, outside of the combo, Barricade Blocker doesn't have much utility, whereas Needle Fiber does. And so I definitely like this better. Then we only play the 1 copy of Auroradon, that actually works very well in this build because, again, we're playing the double O-line, and so we're able to make the Herald before making the Auroradon. And so if we summon Auroradon, it's resolving. And that generally means we don't need a second copy, as you would see in some other Eldlich decks. For the Synchros, we play one copy of Metal Marcher, one copy of Herald, one copy of Borreload Savage Dragon. And this is pretty much the essentials that you need for this extra deck. And then from here, I think you really have 3 flex spots to decide what you want to play, most. And so what I ended up going with for this build is the 4th gate, one copy of Selene, and then one copy of Access Code Talker. And so I really like playing this 4th gate because it makes it so that when you go second, it's very easy to just OTK your opponents. You can just play Network, summon all 4 gates, and then attack into your opponent's board. And this 4th one usually gets up to like 8,000 attack for the 4th attack, and that's just, you can just like one punch opponents. It's very, very easy. And so I definitely like playing this a lot. Another thing I was considering was Megaclops. But the one thing I didn't like about Megaclops was that if you summon the 3 gates and then go into Megaclops, you don't have any Xyz monsters in your graveyard that were Xyz summoned properly, and because of that, you're unable to actually use Megaclops effect, because Megaclops says that you target an Xyz monster in your graveyard and one card your opponent controls, special summon that monster from the graveyard, and if you do, attach the opponent's card to it. And so because you can't special summon your opponent's monster, you also can attach your opponent's card, and so that means you're not really breaking opponent's boards, you're just summoning a monster that's difficult for them to deal with. And while that's going to be game in some matchups, like while some opponents just won't be able to deal with this, I felt that isn't necessarily the norm right now, and just being a 4K beater sometimes just isn't enough. Like against Eldlich, which is the majority of the meta I think right now, they just have Conquistador. If you're playing against Adamancipators or Dragon Link, it's very likely they have a Buster on board, and so you're probably not summoning this either against Buster. And so it's like in those main 3 matchups, I felt that Megaclops just doesn't quite do enough, whereas the gates, at least, well, I guess if they have Buster, you're not summoning gates either, but the fact that Megaclops can't use the effect is definitely a huge downside. But also, I think the other cards that I added instead are just good too, like the Selene and the Access Code. Again, they make it so that you can just pull random games out of nowhere, to where if you're able to stick a tuner, then you just go for Selene Access Code, plus use Lord's effect, and you're able to OTK your opponents, because Access Code gets up to 53 if you target Selene or Auroradon, and then Lord can be 35 with its own effect, and so 35 plus 53 is 8,800, which is game. And so I definitely like this extra deck a lot. It's been working out pretty well for me. Again, the main thing I was considering was maybe the Megaclops, but not being able to use the effect comes up. Just being a big indestructible monster isn't really as good as it used to be, especially not right now. And then something else I was also considering was Appaloosa, but Appaloosa just didn't come up enough either. The main reason I liked it was so that you had the ability to kind of continue playing around Nibiru. So the one concern that does come up in certain games is like when you start off with your Numeron engine, you go S0, you skip your opponent's turn, and you don't know if they have Nibiru or not. And so you can't really on your next turn safely go into your Jet Synchro plays, because you don't want to just play into a Nibiru and then lose your S0 as well. And so you had to be a little bit careful, and I wanted Appaloosa to be a card that I could make in the meantime while I'm stalling with S0, make an Appaloosa, and then follow up afterwards on that next turn with the Jet Synchron and go full combo under the Appaloosa, and I wouldn't have to worry about the hand traps. So that was the theory behind Appaloosa, but at the same time, it just wasn't coming up very often to where I was able to summon enough monsters to really utilize it like that. Something else I was considering was maybe a copy of Lambda. And so Lambda would be good to where when I have monsters on board, I could at least summon Lambda pretty easily, and then kind of use that with a Gamma in hand to protect my plays. Because Gamma also becomes pretty dead if your opponent doesn't try to ogre your network, and then you're just sitting with monsters on board and no way to use your Gammas. So Lambda would be a way to do that, as well as a way to help you get your Golden Land traps into the graveyard, which also comes up when you're playing like grind games or when you don't really have that many starters. You end up just with Eldlich and Golden Land traps, and you're able to get, like, let's say a Lord and a Conquistador on board. Well, now you still have no way to get your Conquistador to the graveyard, so you're not using the graveyard effect, and so that can be kind of bad sometimes. But being able to play something like Lambda makes it to where you could very easily just summon any other monster, or even 2 copies of Conquistador, 2 copies of Hakero or Lord, or whatever. It's very easy to get 2 monsters on board, and you could just go into a Lambda, get it into the graveyard, and that way you could use that graveyard effect as well. Again, if you have a Gamma in hand, it's going to help you do that as well, help you use that Gamma. And so that's something else I was considering. Maybe that could go in over the 4th copy of Gate. Just another option. Let me know what you guys think about that as well. But let's go ahead and get into the side deck. And so for the side deck, we have 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. And this spot here is going to be 3 copies of something. It's either going to be Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, or maybe even Nibiru. But I'm kind of leaning towards Sphere Mode because it deals with 3 monsters, and against Dragon Link and against Adamanticators, a lot of times they have 3 things on board that you want to deal with. But at the same time, sometimes you can get away with dealing with just 2, and Lava Golem is something that you can attack, whereas you can't attack into a Sphere Mode. And so, wait, I'm pretty sure you can't attack. Yeah, your opponent can't target this for attack, so if you summon it to your opponent's side of the board, you can attack into it. But with Lava Golem, you summon it to your opponent's side of the board, and then you play Network. Network summons out your 4 gates, and then your 4 gates can OTK through a Lava Golem, because the first 2 will attack into it, doubling all of your attacks. The third one will be at 4,000, and so you attack the Lava Golem for 1,000 damage, then use the effect. Your 4th gate will be at 8,000, and you can potentially attack direct depending on their board, or if they have another monster in attack mode, maybe a Link monster, you attack into that, and that's usually going to be game as well. And so I definitely like that play a lot. Sometimes another thing I would do is, when I was playing Megaclops, is I would make that same play like Lava Golem their board, summon out the 4 gates, attack into it, and if it's not game, then just make a Megaclops, and from there you've done so much damage. You have a monster that's difficult to deal with, and if they don't deal with it, you can attack into anything because Megaclops is 4,000 attack anyways, and so you're going to be able to deal a lot of damage, which usually is going to be game. And so I did like Lava Golem a lot too, but again, I think I'm leaning more towards Sphere Mode. Nibiru is another option if your format, your local format is decks where Nibiru is good. So that's something else to think about. Then we have 3 copies of a Pointer of the Red Lotus. I like a Pointer a lot as a good going first card, especially in this deck, because when you combine it with S0, not only are you removing a card from your opponent's hand, but you're also seeing how they're potentially able to deal with S0. And so you're seeing like, oh, okay, do they have Imperm? Do they have Gamma? I can play around those. And so you don't necessarily have to remove the card that would deal with S0. You can remove something else in their hand, like a starter card, and then just play around whatever their answer to S0 would be. So I think that's definitely a really good card. The only downside is that you will lose to cards like Forbidden Droplets or Xyz Encore. Those will definitely be S0 in like every single case, just due to the fact that you can't chain to them. But against other things, I think that a Pointer is very good. And even against cards like Droplets, let's say your opponent loses 2 cards to deal with your S0. You look at their hand and you take something else out, and they only have 3 cards to deal with the rest of your board, and you're probably having like a hand trap or something else on board as well that they're going to have to deal with, like maybe a Scarlet Conquistador. And so I found the Pointer to be very, very effective. Next, we have 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, mostly for Eldlich matchups, but also for slower matchups like Altergeist, Guru. Guru Numeron is becoming more popular as well. I'm actually very interested in trying that deck out too, because for a lot of you guys who've been around the channel for a while, you guys know I've always been a fan of Subterrors, but I was never a fan of like what Guru turned the deck into, like of how it just became like a trap deck pretty much. But I'd be interested in maybe trying like a Numeron, maybe a Numeron Dragma Subterror deck. I might try that next. Maybe, we'll see. But definitely interested in that. But yeah, for those slower paced decks, I do find that Cosmic Cyclone is very strong. We talked about Megaclops. This isn't something I would actually side. It's just here so I remember to talk about it in this video. But I would actually side a copy of Set Rotation and Mystic Mine for going second. And this was actually at first in the main deck instead of the Ash and the Veiler. And I liked it a lot because the Set Rotation makes your deck more consistent. It's another starter card. But also on top of that, you're playing Mine, and between the Mine, the Set Rotation, and the Terraforming, you have 3 cards in your deck that are going to be very powerful going second. And so it made this deck a better going second card. It makes it more consistent. But the only reason I decided to take it out is to again fit in these 2 that gave the deck more utility. Again, I do think that you could play over 40 safely in this deck, so you could just add them to the main and play 42. That's definitely possible, but, up to you, really. and then you could use these 3 slots for something else. I think especially with all the Numeron decks, you might want more for dealing with Numeron aside from the Imperms and the Gammas. You might want to play Chalice, Xyz, Encore, Forbidden Droplets yourself. Those are all going to be very good against Numeron decks. Or you might have more trap decks in your meta, and you might want to play like Lightning Storm, Twin Twister, things like that. And so you really have some space here to do whatever you want, really. But yeah, let's actually go ahead and do some test hands, just a couple. Or we can actually just shuffle the deck here and we can see what the hands look like at least. And so let's see, this first hand we have Network, Imperm, Ash, Jet, and Lord. So this is a pretty strong hand because you have the ability to go with either engine. You have Jet plus Lord, and so that means you have an extender pretty much for your Jet play if you get hand trapped. So if you get Nibiru'd, you'd still be able to end with the Borload Savage Dragon with this hand. But we also have the Network play, and so I think what I would do is just go for Network, go for S0, see if they have that Ogre. If not, you just skip their next turn. You still have the Ash, Imperm as well to stop them, so you have a lot of plays. And then you can follow up with that Jet, maybe even go for game. So definitely a very strong hand. Let's see, hand number 2, we have Network plus Curse. That's pretty much an auto win, I think, in Numeron builds. It's just so hard to play past this, but we also have Conquistador, Imperm, and again, we have the Jet. And so I'd make pretty much the same exact play because Network, Cursed, Conquistador is just very, very strong for a lot of decks to play around. Because you pretty much have your Eldlich engine at maximum capacity. They're under a S0, which really hurts. And you could be following up with a Jet play as well. Come on. Too much power. Let's see, another hand, Tuning, Conquistador, Network, Wall, Imperm. It kind of sucks to draw multiple copies of this, but I think the benefit though is that you do have, the benefit's that Wall is a monster, and so it helps you, make link plays sometimes, but also Network is a spell, so if you draw extra networks, it kind of is good for Lord, and so you really, there's synergy, kind of. There's a little bit of synergy. And there's also definitely synergy with Tuning, being able to mill cards like your Golden Land cards and your Elixirs. Now, one thing I will say about Tuning that you have to be careful with is that you do have to worry about milling calling. That's definitely something that can happen, and while it's a very slim chance of that happening, if it does happen, you just blanked like 7 or 8 cards in your deck, and like a third of your extra deck. And so you really, really want to be careful with that, and if possible, always use your Network before your Tuning. Always. And so let's do maybe a couple more shuffles. Let's see, Lord, Network, Conquistador, Scarlet, set rotation. So again, we have multiple copies of our Network here because we have the Wall and the set rotation. Again, that's kind of annoying, but here the set rotation has a little bit more utility because I added in those mines in the main deck. And also another thing I'd mention is that while I added those into the deck and we're at 42, every single hand that we've seen so far has a starter card. And again, that is the power of playing like 13 to 14 starter cards. Like, we have all of these starters, but they're not really breaking our hands at all. And so this is definitely, again, a very powerful hand because we have access to Network, we have Conquistador, Scarlet, we have Lord. Drawing Lord kind of sucks here, but, it's whatever. The only thing that would make this better is potentially having like a Jet or Tuning too, but this is still a very strong hand. Another hand, again, we have Scarlet, Wall, Lord, Conquistador, and Hakero. Very strong hand once again. Another thing I will mention about this is that these hands are a lot better going first than going second. And again, that's due to only playing the 8 hand traps, whereas really in this format, the ideal number I think is at least 10 to 15, like 10 on the low end. And so we are definitely a little low on hand traps, but post adding in the set rotation and the mine, we at least have more for going second. So we do have at least 11 going second cards between the 8 hand traps, mine, and 2 cards that search mine. So not as bad, but not the best at going second. I will say that's a downside for this deck for sure. But you can say that about any Synchro Eldlich deck because they really aren't good going second either due to their fragility against disruption outside of their hand traps. So here's another quick shuffle. Imperm, Scarlet, Terraforming, Outland, and Tuning. All of the searchers in this hand, so we're thinning the deck, getting to whatever we want. Incredible hand. We haven't bricked a single time. Every single hand has been fire. So that's, again, the consistency. I've got to say it over and over again. That is why this deck is better than the other versions of Eldlich. So Tuning, Scarlet, Black, Imperm, Jet. Too good. Multiple Jets kind of sucks, but you can use Jet to discard Jet. That way you have one loaded up in the graveyard for next turn. Another thing you can do is just discard one of your Eldlichers. That way you could get to a golden land. Actually, yeah, that's the definite play. You don't discard Jet in this hand. What you mill with tuning kind of matters here, because you could mill an Elixir, and then you don't need to force one into the graveyard with Jet. But definitely, most likely in this hand, what you do is you do your Jet combo, use Jet to discard black, then use black on the infix to search Conquistador. So then you have Scarlet Conquistador, plus you having Savage Dragon plus Herald. So very powerful hand. This hand drew Driver, 2 copies of Tuning, so we pretty much have 2 dead cards in our hand, but at the same time we still have combo, and not just combo, but combo plus Cursed, and Scarlet. So, yeah, this deck is insane. Okay, so just to wrap this video up real quick, I just wanted to go over some quick pros and cons of this deck. Again, I do think it's the best version of Eldlich, and I think that is the case because it is the most consistent due to playing more starter cards than the others. It's more versatile because the fact that you play both engines makes this deck good going first or second. It's good going first because you have access to both S0 and your combo. Going second, you have the Numeron engine, which is far better than the Synchro engine going second. You also have access to Mine, which is good going second, could help bait out some negates and then maybe lead into a Synchro play even. And again, that versatility is what makes it so good. You got the ability to OTK with your Numeron gates. You got the ability to OTK with access code. Plenty of ways to go for game. So this deck has consistency, versatility, it's powerful. It's got really everything you need for a good deck. Efficiency, everything. Now, the downsides though are that you have very tight extra deck space. You really only have those 3 flex spots with negate number 4 and then maybe Selene and access code. That's really kind of all you have. Everything else is absolutely necessary for a combo or for your Numeron thing, your Numeron play. And so I think it's definitely tricky to fit in more extra deck stuff. That's actually a big problem. Another downside is the amount of redundancy you have in your hands. Like the fact that you're playing 7 copies of Numeron Network pretty much in calling. Drawing multiples of those can be not good. Like it can be kind of bricky at times. Not like bad bricky. Not bricky to where you're unable to play, like your hand is unplayable. But bricky to where like, oh, I drew 2 networks. Like the other 4 cards in my hand allow me to do whatever I want, but the 5th card could maybe be better. You know what I mean? It's like bougie bricks, not real bricks. And the other thing I'd say is the downside is the number of engine requirements that we're playing. So we do have that 1 copy of Driver, but we also have the calling, we have the 2 O-lines. 4 engine requirements is kind of a lot. And while O-line is not bad to draw sometimes, it makes your combos a little bit better, it's still it's still an engine requirement. Same with calling. Like, sure, you can draw calling and just play it if you also drew a network, but it's still a brick. And so I do think that is a downside. And while you play more engine requirements, it is still more consistent. Don't get me wrong, but you could probably optimize a little more, I think. But alright guys, that is pretty much it for this Numeron Synchro Eldlich deck. Once again, I do believe that this is the best version of Eldlich. If you think another variant is better, let me know in the comment section once again. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.